It wasn't a speech that moved the world that night, it was silence. No microphones, no broadcasts, no endless debates. Just a moment when the world stopped listening and started feeling. Every nation realized that sometimes the loudest message is the one unspoken. In that stillness, power shifted. It was as if the noise of politics, the weight of arguments, and the chaos of headlines suddenly fell away, leaving only raw truth for the world to face. For so long, global narratives have been shaped by speeches, declarations, and carefully crafted words. But on that night, none of those mattered. Leaders could not spin the silence. Analysts could not explain it away. Commentators could not control the story. What remained was a feeling that spread across borders, beyond cultures, beyond politics itself. A feeling that shook people to their core. This was not just about geopolitics or alliances. It was about humanity. The silence carried a weight words could never hold, a reminder that sometimes actions, or even pauses, speak louder than any declaration. And in that moment, every person watching, whether from the heart of power or the corner of an ordinary home, understood the same thing: history had turned a page. The world didn't just hear about it, it felt it. And that feeling, born from silence, echoed louder than any speech in modern history. It was the night the world stopped listening, and for the first time, started truly feeling. Silence spoke louder than words that night, and it was not the silence of weakness, but of power. For centuries, nations have relied on declarations, warnings, and speeches to prove their authority. Leaders raise their voices, armies show their strength, and media spreads their narratives. Yet in this moment, silence itself became the message. It was a deliberate pause, a refusal to engage in the usual noise of politics, and in that pause, the world felt something deeper than words could ever express. The silence was not emptiness. It was heavy, intentional, and charged with meaning. It carried a defiance that no microphone could capture. Without speaking, it told the world, we do not need to explain, we do not need to justify, and we do not need your approval. That unspoken confidence shook observers more than any fiery speech ever could. It became a mirror, forcing nations and individuals alike to reflect, not on what was said, but on what was felt. This moment revealed that true strength is not always about shouting louder than your opponent, but about holding your ground so firmly that the world feels your presence without a single word. It reminded humanity that silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something greater, something beyond language. For those watching, the message was clear. History is not always written in ink or broadcasted through words. Sometimes it is written in silence. And that night, silence carried the weight of power, leaving the world unable to look away, unable to dismiss, and unable to forget. It proved that the loudest statements in history are not always spoken. They are felt. That moment was not about political calculations or diplomatic strategies. It was about human emotion breaking through the polished masks of leaders and nations. For once, the world was not dissecting policies, treaties, or negotiations. Instead, people everywhere felt something: raw fear, awe, respect, even hope. It was as if politics, usually built on logic and structure, suddenly collapsed under the weight of pure human feeling. Leaders who were used to carefully measured responses found themselves at a loss. Their usual vocabulary, sanctions, alliances, condemnations, felt powerless. The world was no longer listening with its mind, it was responding with its heart. And in that shift, the event transcended politics. This was not about numbers, armies, or strategies anymore. It was about an energy that touched something deeper, reminding everyone that before politics, we are human beings moved by emotion. When emotions overtake politics, truth becomes harder to ignore. No matter how governments tried to spin the moment, people saw and felt something undeniable. And once emotion takes root, it becomes a memory etched into collective consciousness. That night, the political arena was drowned out by a wave of feeling, and the world realized that sometimes emotion, not logic, is what reshapes history. There was no official declaration of unity, no alliance signed, and no global agreement announced. Yet, strangely, the world felt united for a fleeting moment. It wasn't unity born of politics, but of silence and shared emotion. People across borders, languages, and ideologies paused together, not because they were told to, but because they felt compelled to. This unspoken unity was powerful because it was voluntary. It wasn't negotiated, forced, or commanded. It emerged naturally, as if silence had synchronized the human spirit. For once, nations that usually disagreed or stood on opposite sides of conflict found themselves caught in the same stillness. the same awareness. That unity revealed something profound. People don't need words to connect. They don't need treaties to agree on what matters most. Sometimes, just one silent moment is enough to remind humanity of its shared heartbeat. And while the silence ended, the feeling it left behind lingered. It showed the world that true unity doesn't always come from spoken promises. Sometimes, it comes from the unspoken bond of simply feeling together. That moment was more than silence. It was a mirror. For the first time in a long time, nations, leaders, and ordinary people were forced to confront the truth of their own fragility. The silence didn't feel empty, it felt heavy, pressing down with the realization that no matter how powerful armies or governments may seem, the world itself is delicate. Technology, weapons, borders, and politics all create the illusion of control, but in that single pause, humanity felt how quickly those illusions can crumble. The strongest nations suddenly felt vulnerable. The most confident leaders suddenly seemed small. It was as if the silence whispered a reminder: everything built by man can be shaken in an instant. This feeling of fragility wasn't meant to weaken. It was meant to awaken. Because when people realize how fragile life and power truly are, they also realize the importance of humility, responsibility, and care. That night, the world didn't just feel fear. It felt awareness. Awareness that humanity walks on thin ground and that arrogance in politics or war can break it. What made the moment unforgettable was that fragility was felt collectively. It wasn't just one nation exposed, but the entire world recognizing its shared vulnerability. And in that recognition came something rare: honesty. The honesty that no one is invincible and no system is unshakable. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was a reminder of limits. It stripped away the illusion of eternal strength and showed that even the most powerful are breakable. That fragile awareness, though uncomfortable, became a lesson that echoed louder than any speech could. The world is strong only when it remembers how fragile it truly is. Not all moments fade with time. Some linger, not because of what was said, but because of what was felt. That night, when the world stopped listening and started feeling, a memory was carved deep into collective history. It wasn't tied to speeches, headlines, or political statements. It was tied to silence. A silence that people could still feel days, weeks, and even months later. The memory endured because it carried weight without needing explanation. Leaders may forget their own words, media may move on to the next crisis, but the unspoken has a strange way of clinging to hearts and minds. This was one of those rare times when silence carried more permanence than action. It became a reference point, a moment people returned to and thought, "Do you remember when the world felt different?" That memory was powerful because it transcended politics. It wasn't about alliances or rivalries, victories or losses. It was human. Everyone, no matter where they stood, felt the same pause, the same breathlessness. That universality made it unforgettable. And like all powerful memories, it did something even more significant. It shaped perspective. People looked at events afterward with a different lens. They remembered how quickly everything could change, how fragile confidence really was, and how sometimes silence could scream louder than war. In the end, the moment became more than an event. It became a story, one that needed no narration, no speeches, no justification. A story carried in memory, whispering the same truth over and over. The loudest echoes are often born from the quietest silences. That's why the memory didn't fade, because what was felt cannot be erased. It lingered, quietly but powerfully, in the conscience of the world. And so, we return to that moment, when the world stopped listening and started feeling. No speech, no declaration, no demand could capture what silence revealed. It reminded us that true power isn't always in words. Sometimes, it's in the stillness that forces every heart to reckon with the truth. This wasn't just history being written, it was history being felt. And long after the microphones switch off and the cameras move on, this memory will remain. The night silence spoke louder than nations. If this moment shook something inside you, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more untold stories, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this video so others can witness the power of silence. Because sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with noise, but with a pause.